you who are attending our session on polystyrene pollution in the Yarra River, the way out. We've been absolutely astounded by the depth of interest across the community in organisations, agencies, individuals. This report has hit a nerve. Now, before we get underway, I'm sure you all want to join with me in acknowledging the traditional owners, the custodians of our beautiful Yarra Birrarung, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Bunurong Bunwurrung. We acknowledge their elders, but we also acknowledge their ongoing care and custodianship for the river we're also privileged to be sustained by in all the activities of our daily life, supplying us not only with water, but with spiritual support and nourishment, as many of us have experienced. Now, I'll just make a few introductions. So my name is Janet Belitho, and I'm introducing this session as the President of the Yarra Riverkeeper Association, and this is work that we're proud to be associated with. I'm joined by our long-time Yarra Riverkeeper Litter Officer, Anthony Desportelis, who is the author of this report, as well as the mini documentary that you will see. Now, this has been Anthony's, maybe not his life's work because he has such a full and rich life, but certainly a centerpiece of his life for over 5 years. He is totally immersed in this topic. And then I'd also like to introduce April Seymour, Executive Officer of the Port Phillip Eco Centre. We have a long-standing collaboration with the Port Phillip Eco Centre because we recognise that the health of the bay, the health of the river, they belong together, they're inseparable. So the healthy river, healthy bay, just goes hand in glove. And so it's a natural collaboration. And April will be moderating the Q&A later in the session. Now, just a little bit about the Yarra Riverkeeper Association to those who perhaps don't know us. The association is 20 years old this year. It was founded in 2005 by citizens passionate about the health of the Yarra River, as it was largely known then. But over 20 years, we've come to know the river more and more as the Birrarung. And our association has just one purpose, and that is to see the Yarra Birrarung healthy, protected and loved. So it's a very enabling, holistic purpose, and it's enabled us to respond to a range of issues over time, starting during the Millennium Drought with a dedicated campaign to secure environmental flows for the then much, starved river. And I think Ian Penrose, our inaugural riverkeeper, is on the call, who is very much associated with that campaign. And then, you know, a defining moment in the life of the association as we campaigned long and hard for legislation to protect the river, to bring together all the agencies and bodies that are involved in the care of the river in some way, to bring them together under protective legislation, which was achieved with bipartisan support in 2017 to achieve the Yarra River Willipgin Birrarung Marun Act. This is legislation. You know, in a democracy, there can be no more powerful instrument. And that legislation has now been translated into the Yarra Strategic Plan, Burned Up Birrarung burned up umaku, and we're enthusiastic and passionate supporters of seeing that plan implemented. And this project we're about to hear about is a signature project of the Yarra Strategic Plan. And just one more thing about the association. You know, we all care so much about the river. We want it to protect it, but we also want to celebrate the river. And for the last, we've held now 2 festivals, the Birrarung River Fest, to celebrate the river in every dimension along its length, whatever your interest, whatever your passion, to enable people to develop a deeper connection and appreciation of our river. Now, I'm now going to move to introducing this polystyrene work, which began 5 years ago, 2020, just on the cusp of COVID, when we were wanting to determine what was the most abundantly littered item in the river. That involved a lot of counting, and it was COVID times. And Anthony mailed out to a whole number of willing volunteers locked in at home to actually count the litter, samples of litter from Bandalong litter traps in the river. But having determined that polystyrene was the most abundant littered item in those litter traps, well, what then? So we moved on to phase 2. Phase 2 was to determine what the source of that polystyrene was. Where was it coming from? And having determined that, we then moved into phase 3, which is where we're at now. So, okay, having determined what the largest polluters were, and Anthony will go into that, was, okay, what are we going to do about it? And this is where we're up to right now. So the way this session is going to work is that Anthony is going to show a mini documentary that he created, which goes for about 6 minutes. Then he'll present some slides, just a few, to stimulate our thinking and our conversation. And then we'll hand over to April, who'll facilitate the discussion and question and answer. So in the meantime, as questions or thoughts or observations arise, if you could just pop those in the Q&A, or that would be a very helpful thing to do. And I think we're now at the point where I could invite Anthony to introduce the documentary that he has created. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Janet. Welcome, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. Just let us know if there are any issues during the screening and during my presentation. It's great to see you all here. Thank you for being here on this cold afternoon. So, as Janet mentioned, I put together a documentary. Just a quick bit about it before I press play and share my screen. The reason I decided to make this is, one, because I am a designer and I love visual things, and video storytelling is a big part of communication. It was, how do I share what I've seen going around in my project over the last couple of years? How do I explain to people what is going on once we started focusing in on construction sites? And I thought the best way to do that was with video, because yes, photos are great, but the video really shows a lot more once it's strung together. So that was the reasoning behind it. It is to give you a baseline visual and understanding of what is going on the ground, and then we can have a discussion about it. So I shall share my screen. And can everyone please confirm that that it is working? Or April or Janet, can you confirm that you're seeing a black screen?
Yes.
Cool. All right, I believe we're ready to begin. Enjoy, everyone. I'm going to pretend I'm not listening to my own voice. The Yarra River flows 242 kilometres in the Yarra Ranges.
Anthony, sorry, when you've muted yourself, you've also muted your audio from your documentary. Do you mind starting it again?
Yeah, in April, I'm not seeing the full screen either.
Interesting. Okay. I'll leave myself unmuted there.
I'm not seeing the full screen either.
Interesting. So some people can see it and others cannot.
Can you try
I
again?
can now. It's okay now.
Does it depend on your current view of the meeting, or?
You were spotlighted, so I've unspotlighted you. So
Okay.
I think we're ready to roll.
Okay. Great. Let's try again. The Yarra flows 242 kilometres in the Yarra Ranges to the Port Phillip Bay, an essential artery for biodiversity, culture and community. In the last 4 years, the Yarra Riverkeeper Association has investigated a persistent and pervasive threat: expanded polystyrene, or EPS for short. EPS consumer items are now banned, and pollution from the retail industry is dropping. EPS in the construction industry, however, has no such controls and relies on enforcement and voluntary participation in initiatives to reduce pollution. EPS is a common building material in Australia, light, rigid, and highly insulating. It is widely used in the form of waffle pods and foam cladding to build our homes. Yet these are the very qualities that make it one of the most problematic pollutants in our waterways. EPS can have a range of additives that go beyond just physical choking hazards for marine life. Recent audits conducted across 80 construction sites in Melbourne revealed a confronting reality. 71% of the sites visited showed signs of polystyrene pollution. Of those, 98% had EPS either directly on site, on surrounding nature strips, or washed into nearby drains. EPS is brittle. Once exposed to weather or mechanical force, it easily fragments into thousands of pieces, many of which find their way into the Yarra River. Over time, these pieces become microplastics, almost impossible to collect, but still capable of causing significant environmental harm. In Melbourne alone, EPS has been found to be the most commonly littered macroplastic in the Yarra River. It is estimated that over 92 million pieces of polystyrene are captured each year by the river's litter traps. When combined with material that escapes into the Port Phillip Bay, that figure rises to an estimated 382 million pieces annually. A key source of this pollution is found in the construction sector, such as building concrete slabs with waffle pods, large, hollow EPS blocks that reduce the volume of concrete needed. These pods are often over-ordered, cut on site, or damaged, generating offcuts and fragments that are frequently left exposed to the wind and rain. Just as concerning is the use of EPS cladding, which has become increasingly common in residential developments. Blocks of cladding foam are routinely cut in open air, with particles visibly escaping under fences, littering the streets, and entering stormwater drains. At several sites, cladding was left in piles, broken down into small pieces, and mixed with other construction waste. While some builders using EPS are doing the right thing, there are still many sites that are poorly managed. Once EPS enters a waterway, it is very difficult to recover and infeasible to recycle. It floats, it breaks apart, and it lingers for hundreds of years. Wildlife in and around the Yarra River and in the bay are all at risk of ingesting or being impacted by this plastic. The industry says their EPS is fully recyclable, offer collections from sites after use, and have a styrocycle scheme with a few bins around Melbourne. However, no data on the volume being returned has been made available. These programs are voluntary, and a percentage of builders dump excess material on vacant lots, particularly in newer residential estates where anonymity is high. Although EPS is recyclable if very clean, in practice it often becomes small chunks or is dirtied by mud, paint or bacteria and contaminates industry recycling machines. In searching for other places to recycle EPS, we dropped into the City of Yarra Waste Depot to see what polystyrene looks like once clumped into a dense recyclable material.
In Victoria, there's only a small number of councils who have a poly machine, processing machine, which we do, and most councils actually send their poly to landfill, which is a really bad outcome when there's really good outcomes available.
So who is on the ground to help reduce pollution? Currently, our only form of deterrence are local government compliance officers, 2 of which were interviewed about this problem. Council litter enforcement teams average around 2 officers, which they say are not enough to be proactive in the reduction of EPS pollution through fines. But there is more going on. Fines are not high, averaging $400 for untidy bins or litter on site, which can be absorbed into cost of builds, and are not acting as deterrents or encouraging better site management. The City of Wyndham made over $1 million in construction fines last year, and the City of Casey made 566 infringements, yet the pollution continues. Builders have a high rate of turnover with their contractors, the officers said, and that makes educating them and holding them accountable difficult. Site foremen are now spread thinner than ever, with one site foreman often managing over 50 builds. Councils also have different local laws and ways of operating, which means builders and contractors can be confused about the specifics on site. But what remains constant between local government areas is inadequate site bins, the frequent pollution of EPS, and a dumping culture to save costs on disposal of waste. A Wyndham compliance officer said the #1 priority is working with the subcontractors or moving to alternatives of EPS, which do exist and are readily available in the Melbourne market. It is important to note that EPS is not the only choice available to builders. In place of EPS blocks to fill concrete slabs, builders can turn to materials like recycled plastic void formers, aerated concrete, or compacted recycled materials. For external wall cladding, natural and durable options such as fibre cement, timber, hempcrete, or recycled bricks offer greater environmental resilience without contributing to microplastic pollution. As the construction industry evolves, these choices offer a path forward that aligns durability with ecological responsibility. We have 2 choices moving forwards. Either we prohibit EPS in favour of alternatives, or we increase our response to pollution reduction enforcement, an effort that will require specialised bins for EPS use, increased presence of council officers, and action from site managers. Either approach will have its challenges, but we simply cannot continue to pour millions of pieces of EPS into our rivers and bay.
All right. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm going to go straight into the presentation and then we can have our Q&A session after that. So, can everyone see the first slide okay? Yep, excellent. So, I hope you've all taken in the last 7 minutes of that. There was a lot of footage there of polystyrene, but realistically, that is what it's like. It is everywhere and it is in just enormous amounts. And that's what it feels like to be out there finding polystyrene. It's just overwhelming. So that was one of the aims of the video. So let's get straight into it. So you might hear the words polystyrene, expanded polystyrene, EPS being used interchangeably. That is because the full form is expanded polystyrene, which gets shortened to polystyrene and gets shortened to EPS. We have here the pellets, which they start out as. So they're hard plastic pellets of the material polystyrene. And then it gets expanded and aerated, which is what makes it so light and fluffy. And then those beads get molded into the shape of the product that's being made. So that's a little bit about how polystyrene starts out. I'll leave that for there. I was going to talk about pellet pollution as well, but that's a whole nother topic. So why is polystyrene a problem? This has been fairly well documented. There's 2 main problems with polystyrene. The first one is a physical choking hazard for wildlife. The physical impacts of polystyrene can be blocking of digestive tracts and can cause starvation. The other less, obvious impact of polystyrene is the chemical pollution and the chemicals that are leaching into wildlife when ingested. Unfortunately, polystyrene is not alone in this. All microplastics, all plastics in waterways pick up organic pollutants. These can be pesticides, hormone disruptors, flame retardants, anything heavy metals, or not so much heavy metals, but organic pollutants. Anything that's in the water is attracted to the plastic surface, and the smaller the plastic surface to weight ratio, it becomes more toxic the smaller it is, and the easier it is to be ingested by smaller invertebrates. So we have a problem with polystyrene, and that is the chemical danger of it, as well as the physical harm. So as Janet mentioned before, there were 3 parts to this. Phase 1 was done by Nicole Kowalczyk, who worked at the Riverkeepers, and I took on from her. But one of the things that she did was, or they did in that project, was find the initial sources, come up with a rating tool, which was how bad is the pollution coming from this site. And they got some early observations of polystyrene pollution. They also had this decision tree, which is what they used to determine their search and where they would look for polystyrene pollution early on. Phase 2, when I took over, one of the main things that Janet mentioned, going around to polystyrene, to construction sites to find and quantify how much is coming from which industry. So we went to 5 different industry, or sites from 5 different industries, and found that construction came out on top in terms of volume of polystyrene. And then we also had the quantification in the river. So we took samples from floating litter traps, and we worked with students and citizen scientists to count that, just to put a rough estimate to how much polystyrene there might be at any one time in the traps. And then, as Janet mentioned, we said, well, what now? And the last 2 years have been about roundtables, so bringing together all the stakeholders who have some influence, some responsibility on this issue together, and discussing what is going on, mapping out who's doing what and what's not being done. And there were lots of stakeholder interviews with industry as well, even with the polystyrene body themselves, and building associations. One of the, disappointments with the project was that we really didn't get any participation from construction companies and or site workers. And that's something that we really wanted to have, but in the end, it did not work out. They're apparently quite difficult to engage with, and that is something that's not felt just by ourselves. We developed this diagram, which is essentially a mapping of influences. What is the polystyrene journey? Where does it start? Who is it being handled by? And where does it end up? And then who's on the ground and who has influence? All of this is in the report if you want to look at it in more detail. So the main takeaways from the 3 roundtables that we had, the first one is managing EPS has to be a just ongoing way of doing business. We really need to up our game when it comes to the management of the material, and that means not only from a governmental point of view, but also on site, what's available to help us control the pollution. We need to highlight our requirement. It seems like it shouldn't need to be done, but again, we must highlight the requirement that builders contain their EPS. It seems as though there can be more work done on education, but we will talk more about education as a response later on. Education must come together with regulation to shift expectations. That's based on an existing report that came out 20 years ago saying a very similar thing to what we've found, which is we need regulation and enforcement if we want the education to be taken up. We have to share progress and tell stories of what's working. There's not too much at the moment working. There is some response from certain councils who are taking a bit of a lead on this issue, which is great, and we did share that in the video. And then we need a network of people who are going to keep working on this, because it's a really big issue and there are lots of people involved, and the riverkeepers have done the groundwork, and now it's time to take it up. So our recommended actions, I've got the main 4 here. There are more in the report. So we need to establish the working group. We really need to work in the construction industry and get some change going on if we're going to try and control polystyrene pollution. That means we need new bins. We cannot use site fences as bins. It just doesn't work. Whilst there are bags dropped off with polystyrene in most cases to sites, those bags are not being used most of the time. And where they are being used, there are still lots of offcuts and smaller pieces of pollution that are not quite priority for site workers. So we really need to improve their work ethic, I guess, and their understanding of what's going on and where that polystyrene ends up. And that is part of our mission, is to spread that awareness and education. And then, so this gets a bit technical, but in terms of our enforcement response, we need to clarify exactly who is responsible for on the ground enforcement and boost that response as well. And yeah, we need to increase penalties because at the moment penalties are not enough of a deterrent for workers and for site foremen to take polystyrene pollution prevention seriously. So that's kind of the main outcomes of the report. And now we'd like to start, I guess, a question for discussion. This is the next logical step that's come out of the work, which you can clearly read there: phase out and reduce. What approach are we going to take? So I'm just going to go through some of the challenges for each of them. And once I've been through that, we're actually going to begin our Q&A. So we'll go through these fairly quickly. So in terms of reducing pollution, we have a few challenges to do that. The first one is we're going to need a more coordinated, stronger response from councils and enforcement officers around Victoria. That is quite a challenge because whilst we do have some local councils leading the charge and taking initiative, even their response is still slightly needing more resources. And so that is one of the biggest challenges, I think, from a enforcement point of view, is getting that collaboration. We need new containment methods and practices on site, or we need, well, yeah, because we just don't have the right bins available for workers to contain polystyrene. The nature of EPS as a material is always going to be challenging to contain. And then we need more resources to monitor sites, as I mentioned before. And the dispersed nature of the construction industry with contractors, subcontractors, is a really difficult one because they're the people who are handling polystyrene, but they're also quite difficult to reach and engage. When it comes to phasing out polystyrene, we have some big challenges. Builders will have to spend more on alternatives for now. There are alternatives out there, but it will mean that as polystyrene is one of the cheaper materials to build with, it will mean that builders will have a slightly increased cost. The resistance from the EPS industry and supply chain will be one of the biggest. During the recent round of the National Plastics Plan, when polystyrene was being banned or phased out, polystyrene in industry was removed from that due to, I guess, conversations and resistance from the industry to have polystyrene phased out. There is an estimated 600 to 800 jobs, we could say, in the polystyrene industry. And it's understandable that, that's if we're going to phase this material out, then there's some consequences there. But I guess one of the things that I'd like to highlight is polystyrene being used in construction, supported by the industry, and the roughly 600 to 800 jobs is one of the reasons why we're continuing this material, because it is not the only material available to builders and it is not used in every home. And so I think we need to really think and question that and work out, is it worth it to continue with this material, or do we really need to push for a phase out? But the polystyrene is actually an insulative material, and therefore it does increase the eco-efficiency of houses. And so by removing it as a material, builders will have to work a little bit harder to improve the eco-efficiency of their houses, but it can be done. And the main advocate for keeping polystyrene is the industry rather than builders themselves. We haven't necessarily had builders rallying together to keep polystyrene in use, and that's because they know that they do have other options. And as you saw in the video, as I mentioned, EPS is not the only option. We have other alternatives already. So that's going to be one of the main discussion points, I guess, but you're welcome to take it wherever you want. Just quickly, our report is live on the website if you haven't already seen it. And we've also just made public that documentary, which I screened before, on our YouTube channel. So you can search up Yarra Riverkeeper on YouTube and that should come up there. And we'd love you to share those. So moving forwards, if you could share your report and video with anyone who's interested, act within your sphere of influence, whatever that might be, whether it's picking up polystyrene on the ground or talking to a builder that you might get your home built with and ask them if they're going to use polystyrene. And to support YRKA, obviously, with our continued advocacy on this issue. And please do get in touch if you do have any further questions after today, or if there's any projects you want to get involved in. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate your attention, and I hope you've, one, learned something today, and two, have got some thoughts going around the use of polystyrene in our construction industry.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Not the first time that I saw this presentation, and it's still extremely striking to me. Hello, everyone. I'm April from the Port Phillip Eco Centre, and work happily on preventing pollution in waterways across NAM with folks like Anthony. And I just want to acknowledge the efforts that go into a report like this from scientists and people who sit at round tables, who write, volunteers who count things on their kitchen tables to give the robust data behind an issue that might appear very obvious if you walk past a few construction sites. But really, once you begin to look, it is hard to unsee. And the solutions are what we want to lift our vision towards. So we've had a few questions starting to come into the chat for you, Anthony. If you want to unshare your screen and then we can see you again as you answer them, that'll be fantastic. Thanks, everyone. The first question comes from Lynn, and this is in regards to resource recovery services at many of the local government areas that most don't accept polystyrene now, and whether that's a problem, at least until this product would be banned or phased out. You mentioned a few cases in the video around councils that do, but we have another question as well that's sort of related. Basically, do people accept it? Why or why not? And what are some of those complications around that recovery process?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So as far as I believe, it's the vast minority of councils that are recycling polystyrene into a hard, dense material. From what I understand, that hard, dense polystyrene is then sent overseas for recycling. That's what I was told. So as far as the actual recycling of it goes, it's not converted into new products necessarily here in Australia. However, as they mentioned, is collecting it the hard part? Yes, collecting it can be the hard part. As polystyrene is phased out for consumers in TV boxes and fridges and things like that, we will see less polystyrene being, I guess, you will have less people wanting to take it to their council recycling centre. So most builders are not bringing their polystyrene to council recyclers. They're taking it straight back to Unipod or the company who manufactured it. That's the kind of recycling process that they've set in place. But as it comes to the everyday person having polystyrene and wanting to recycle it at their local council, unfortunately, until more councils invest in the recycling machines for polystyrene, they're not going to be an option, and we will end up with all of that polystyrene going to landfill. Now, the Styrocycle bins that were featured in the video are open to the public, and you are welcome to take your polystyrene to those Styrocycle bins and put them in there. As long as they're clean and they're not in small fragments, that is probably the best option that we all have. And that's a matter of finding those Styrocycle bins online and driving out to them. They're not necessarily that close, but they are the best option in terms of getting that polystyrene recycled here in Australia.
Anthony, is it possible to either post a link to that or in the follow-up for this event? We have some folks that are very interested in learning more about those locations for recycling.
Yeah.
We have some questions around prevention through phase out and also some around enforcement. So one of the questions is around EPA. You've mentioned in your documentary the monitoring by some councils, only 2 councils in our Melbourne metro area. Is the EPA involved with monitoring the sources of EPS or policing its loss into the drainage systems?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and it gets into the technicalities, and a lot of the roundtable discussions were around working this out. And so the understanding that I've got at this stage is that the EPA, their role in, I guess, enforcement for residential construction sites is minimal, because they are small sites scattered all over Victoria. They don't focus on those as much as the larger industrial pollution events that occur. The EPA do have OPAL officers, which are officers for the protection of the local environment, and they are embedded within certain councils. I, for whatever reason, wasn't able to speak with one of them, but I did get to go around with council officers. As far as the EPA's involvement, it seems to be more from setting legislation and the background, the law to fine against. So with the general environmental duty, which the EPA released, it gives us all more power to hold those who are polluting accountable. And a lot of the time councils can use that if they don't have their own strong enough local laws to fine or make infringements. And so it seems like the EPA take a more regulatory response rather than an on-the-ground enforcement, handing fines to builders position.
Thank you. Thanks. I noticed lots of great questions coming up in the chat, and just want to acknowledge that the Yarra Riverkeeper Association will be able to respond to all of these after the event. Lots of people have come together today, and we won't get to all the questions, but I'm going to pick another theme that has come up quite a bit, which is that actually there's a push right now to speed up housing construction, addressing one crisis, but potentially exacerbating this crisis. So if you have any comment on that, including a suggestion whether influence on architects and engineers to not specify the use of EPS might be a potential way to swap in alternatives. Comments on that, Anthony?
Yeah, so definitely it's a concern for me, the push or that we need houses faster than we can build them. It sets up an environment where polystyrene will be favoured because it is quick, light, cheap. It is a preferred material in that building environment. Things like brick, laying weatherboard, it just does take more time. And so I suspect that with those developments, we will see more polystyrene being used. One of the other issues that we've got just quickly regarding this is there is a third of all builders in Melbourne who are not part of either Master Builders Association or the other peak body that represents builders. And those builders are referred to almost as kind of rogue builders. They're not really a part of anybody, and they kind of can do what they like. And so they're also not reachable because the communications that get passed from bodies like Master Builders Association, their newsletter, their comms aren't reaching them. So there is also this quick build, let's get houses up. We've got some builders who are potentially doing the right thing and want to build sustainable houses, but many, and I've seen the sites of some of these builders, they are just an absolute mess, and there's no care given at all. So I suspect that will also increase. And then the second part of the question was on, able to remind me?
I think that was around, is there potential to influence the big build or architects, some of the different players that were in your journey of polystyrene?
Yeah, so I think there's certain, as far as architects go, there are certain cases where polystyrene is favoured with shifting soils in the slabs because they're a little bit better at handling the movement of the ground than other materials, but I'm sure there will be alternatives that will take into account those properties as well coming out. I think in other cases, other than that one, yeah, it would be great if we could get architects kind of designing without polystyrene, especially on those second-story townhouses that we see quite a lot of. That's usually where polystyrene is used a lot, is in that kind of second-story cladding, because it is lighter. So if we could kind of change those materials, I don't know if they have the capability to specify those designs, but a lot of the metricons and large builders that kind of have specific designs that they replicate en masse, it would be great to get some of those changed out.
Thanks, Anthony. There's lots of potential threads here which really highlight the benefit of the recommendation one around a roundtable to continue to collect, test, and implement these ideas for change with all of the people in the puzzle. There's lots more questions, comments, congratulations, and one generous offer or / question. Julia asks, are there any teacher resources that might have been prepared to work with students around what you found? And if not, would you mind if she made some and shared it with the association?
Yeah, so more than welcome to make some. That would be awesome. I did make 3 infographics, visual graphically designed pages that show, I guess, a bit of the process. So from where we find the pollution, so some gets lost at the manufacturing places, and then it gets taken to the construction site, and more is lost there, and then it ends up in the waterways. So those can be made available to you to use in your materials. But if you do make any of your own, please do check in with us. Yeah. That'd be great.
Fantastic. And education to different audiences is important. I think, Anthony, you brought attention just a few minutes ago to the general environmental duty, which is just a reminder that all of us as Victorians have an obligation to reduce harm to environment and to humans. But it does rely on that you know better and can do better. So that education that I see a lot in the chat, ideas for how to share this report, the questions, the resources are all popping up, and that's fantastic. Any final words, Anthony? Or before we
Yeah, I
hand?
just wanted to address one of the responses in the chat. So mycelium mushroom foam is kind of one of my favorite materials. It is the best placed material to reduce polystyrene moving forwards. It's light, it's naturally flame resistant, it's moldable, it's completely decomposable. It's amazing. The biggest problem we've got with using it instead of building materials is that it needs to be certified. It needs to get all of its checks done to say that it can be used in construction. And I think as far as my last conversations go with Fungi Solutions, that was a process that they were exploring. But even if they do get those certifications to use mycelium in construction, then there is the question of, can they scale up enough and grow the mycelium fast enough to make waffle pods and large sheets that can be used in cladding. That, if it was up to me, that's where I would invest all of my resources straight into that. But that being said, these things will take time, but that's kind of where my hope is for EPS being replaced.
Thanks,
Okay, well,
Anthony.
I think I'm going to jump in now, April, because this is a busy time of the afternoon, and rather than people just kind of drifting off, I'd like to bring things to a conclusion. So I'd like to thank Anthony for a truly exceptional presentation, his thoroughness, the respectful approach with which he conducts his work, his the design skills he's brought to his work. We have been so fortunate to work with someone as skilled as Anthony, and I can't thank him enough. So, but then I'd also like to, as April said, every work has come together through the contribution of others, and this work would not have been possible at all if it had not been for the support of DECA and DELP before them. So there've been a lot of, just the chat's been going off, so many suggestions, so many ideas, so many possibilities. But, now I've got to sort of lay the truth upon this conversation that the Yarra Riverkeeper Association has no further funding to continue this work. And so part of this evening's presentation is a call to action to all of you on the call to bring whatever resources you've got to bear on this situation, and because at this point we do not have a resource, a person, and Anthony to carry this work forward. So your ongoing support for the Yarra Riverkeeper Association would be so deeply appreciated, either just through following our work or supporting us financially, which as an independent community group would be very much appreciated. So I'd also like to thank April and colleagues from the Port Phillip Eco Centre who share our passion and commitment for this work. And, the Eco Centre is doing outstanding work on microplastic pollution in the Bay. So as we bring this session to a close, I'd just like to reiterate those calls to action. The resources are now available. The more widely you can share them, talk about them, that would be incredible. Then also to act within your sphere of influence. We've had this amazing offer to create educational resources. There may be things that you can do within your sphere of influence. Now, as we've gone through this work, step by step, phase by phase, it's just the closer you get to it, the more obvious it becomes that there is really no safe way to use polystyrene on construction sites. The nature of the material, its lightness, its brittleness, its tendency to fragment mean that even with the most exceptional compliance, enforcement, and management, this material is going to leak into the environment. And as Anthony's explained, you know, many of these construction sites are nowhere near a waterway, but through the action of wind, the movement of the drainage network, they end up in our waterways and bays. And as many of you have said, with the push for more housing construction, you know, there's the potential for this problem to get a lot worse. So I think, given the depth and extent of your feedback, it may take us just a little while to pull together responses that are worthy of the excellent questions and comments you've made, but we will get back to all of those of you who have booked on the call. And in conclusion, I'd just like to thank you all so much for your eager, enthusiastic participation in this session. And on behalf of the Yarra Riverkeeper Association, I'd like to thank you all and say goodbye.